And if you talk to most people, I did a radio show earlier this morning here, and the one caller that called in said, "Oh, you're wrong, Peter. That this is all because of not enough regulation. It was just unbridled capitalism. If we just had more regulations, we wouldn't have had this financial crisis." That is the conventional wisdom, and that is the result of a probably good propaganda effort by the government to get people to believe that the crisis was caused by a lack of government. We actually had the U.S. government convened a commission before Congress, a committee, to try to find out why there was a financial crisis. And I remember thinking, gee, since I wrote a book predicting the financial crisis, since I've been going on television for 2 or 3 years warning about the financial crisis, this is a perfect committee for me to testify in front of, because after all, I predicted it, so if you want to know why there's a financial crisis, just ask me. And I'll tell you. In fact, you don't even have to ask me. You can spend $19 and buy my book. It would have been a lot cheaper than this $1 million commission that they convened. But out of, I don't know how many witnesses they had, 100 or 200 witnesses. They would not. They didn't testify. They didn't permit me to testify. In fact, not a single witness who testified predicted the crisis. And in fact, every witness who testified came to the same conclusion. It was the fault of capitalism, and we need more government. And so it was. They had a determined, preconceived conclusion that they just wanted to support by bringing in witnesses that would help them arrive at that predetermined conclusion. They didn't want to hear an honest assessment of why there was a financial crisis. They simply wanted to use the financial crisis as an excuse to pass Dodd-Frank and to grow the size of government. But the problem is the Federal Reserve is still there. And in fact, it's doing more damage now than ever. Fannie and Freddie are still there, as is the FHA, guaranteeing more mortgages than ever, and on shakier terms than ever. So all the things that the government did to distort the housing market and to distort the free market, they're still doing it. So we haven't reined in any of the excesses in government, and so we haven't solved any of the problems. Now, where are we today? So we had a housing bubble because the Fed kept interest rates too low for too long. What is the solution that we are now pursuing under Ben Bernanke? The exact same policy. In order to stimulate us out of the recession that resulted from the bursting of the stock market bubble, we brought interest rates down to 1%. In order to stimulate the economy out of the recession that resulted from the collapse of the real estate bubble, we brought interest rates down to 0. And the fiscal stimulus is far greater than what we had under Bush. Instead of running a $300 billion deficit or whatever it was, now it's a $1.5 trillion a year deficit. So we haven't just doubled down on these policies. We've quintupled down on them. And what is the result? Well, the phony recovery that we had under the Bush administration and Greenspan, that lasted about 4 or 5 years. So we had 4 or 5 years of false prosperity, and then we paid for it when the bubble burst. Now, would we have been much better off had we not had that phony prosperity? Had we simply allowed a deeper recession to take place during the earlier part of that decade? Of course. During that recessionary period, that short, shallow recession, consumers actually took on debt. They ended the recession with more debt than they began it. During that recession, we had record car sales and record home sales. It doesn't sound like a cleansing recession where you're having record amounts of spending and going deeper into debt. So had we had a more severe recession in 2001, 2002, then we never would have had a housing bubble. Clearly, we would be better off now had we taken a little more pain back then. But did we learn from that? No. We're doing the exact same thing. We are refusing to allow the market to repair the damage done by that housing bubble, done by all the excess consumption. Think about all the money that Americans spent that they didn't have, based on the expectation that their house would go up in value forever. People decided they didn't have to save. They lever up. They bought all sorts of things. We ran the trade deficit went through the roof. We did a lot of stupid things because we thought we all won the lottery. And when we realized that we didn't, we had to go through a big recession. And now not only did we have to restore the damage from this recession, but we still had to deal with what the problems from the last one, from that stock market bubble, that we never fully resolved because the government interfered with the process. So we're in a much deeper hole now. But now what? So instead of learning from our mistakes, we repeat them on a bigger scale. But what did we get to show for it? This time we didn't even get, 4 or 5 years of false prosperity. We're already on the verge of the next recession if it hasn't already started. What did we get? We got 2 or 3 years of barely any kind of growth, and I don't think we actually had any economic growth. We got the GDP to go up. Yeah, because we borrowed a bunch of money and spent it. And as you spend borrowed money, that makes the GDP go up. But the problem is when you have to pay it back, that makes the GDP go down. Plus you got interest to deal with. That makes it worse. And of course, I just saw they came up with statistics, I think earlier this week, that during the time period of the recession, which officially went from December 2007 through June of 2009, during that period, U.S. household income adjusted for inflation dropped by 3.5% during the recession. And of course, it actually dropped more than that because the government's measures of inflation are inaccurate. I think inflation is a lot higher than the official estimates reveal. But even if you use the government's numbers, household income dropped by 3.5% during the recession. During the recovery, which started supposedly in June of 2009 up until today, household income has dropped 7.5%. In additional. So how is it that American families are doing worse in the recovery than they did during the recession? Maybe it's because we don't even have a recovery. The whole thing is phony. I think that we've had so much government stimulus that doesn't work anymore. That we've built up a tolerance. And all we're going to get is an overdose now. We're not going to get the high that we used to get. Yes, it worked for a while. It worked in the 90s because we built up a stock market bubble. We had a lot of phony wealth in the stock market we can all spend. And then it worked in the housing bubble, but it ain't working now because we're not getting another housing bubble. We're not getting another stock market bubble. So we're not getting all this phony wealth that we can spend. What are we getting for all this stimulus? More government. That is the new bubble. It's in government. All the cheap money of the 90s went into the stock market. In the 2000s, it went into the real estate market. Where's it going now? It's going into more and bigger government. The size of the government has exploded. I mean, the government is spending almost $4 trillion a year. It's twice, in 2000, when the decade began, I think the budget was $2 trillion, or even less. It was 1 point something. So we basically doubled the size of government, and all this money is just going into that. And so we got something to show for the stock market bubble. We got something to show for the real estate bubble. We're going to get nothing to show for the government bubble. Although one of the funny things about some of the Keynesians, and even Alan Greenspan is signing on to this, is that people are actually saying that the way we solve the problem in the housing market is for the government to buy up all the houses and destroy them. And if we did that, we would really have nothing to show for the housing bubble. Because for all the problems of the housing bubble, at least we got the houses. Yeah, it would have been better off if we did something else because we built houses we really didn't need. But now that they're there, I mean, destroying them would mean we got nothing to show for the housing bubble. I mean, yes, now that they're there, we can live in them. That's one problem we don't have now in America is housing. We got plenty of houses. We got other problems. But if we destroy those houses, then housing will become a problem too. The whole idea is, well, we need to destroy houses so that the prices won't go down. Well, what's wrong with housing prices coming down? That means housing is more affordable for people. If we had cheaper housing, that's a good thing. And if destroying some houses is a good idea, then why don't we destroy them all? Well, gee, that would really be an economic boom then, right? We'd have no place to live. We'd really have to start working hard to replace those houses. The whole thing is nonsense. But this is the Keynesian mentality. And what is really behind, again, all this effort is we got to get people spending. People have to spend. No, they don't. Americans aren't spending because they're broke. And some Keynesians will acknowledge, yes, Americans are too broke to spend, so the government should do it. But where's the government going to get the money? If the people are broke, the government is broke. Because the government's not going to get the money from, outer space. It's got to get it from American citizens. Now, it can temporarily borrow it from the rest of the world, but ultimately it's the American citizens that have to pay those debts off. And if Americans are broke, how can we pay the debts? How can we go deeper into debt if we already can't pay the debts that we have? The truth of the matter is we're in trouble because we borrowed and spent too much money. Borrowing and spending more is not the way out. It's the opposite. We have to stop spending. not just individuals, but the government. Everybody has to stop spending, because that's the only way we can start saving. You can't spend and save simultaneously. And what happens if we save? Well, if we save and Americans put money in the bank, now there's money available for businesses. Businesses can use that money to buy equipment, to make investments, to hire people, to produce things. That's what we have to do. We have to save and produce our way out of this crisis. We can't get out of the hole by digging it deeper, but it's never going to happen because everything the U.S. government is doing is preventing that from happening. The minute anybody tries to save, it's a national crisis. We have to do something about it. We need a stimulus. We can't have anybody saving. We need spending. And it's the whole idea is that economies are driven by spending, but that is putting the cart before the horse. It's production that makes spending possible. You don't have any demand unless you have supply. I mean, in a sense, there's demand in that you have desire, which is infinite. I mean, the government never has to stimulate demand. I mean, everybody wants everything. What stops people from buying is they can't afford it. Right? I have a 9-year-old son. I mean, he wants everything he sees. I don't have to stimulate it. I have to let him know you can't have everything you want. But what you need is production. And the government can't create production by printing money. You know, all it does is printing money is drive up the price of what's already been produced. So we have to recognize the cause of these problems, and if we don't, we're never going to solve them. And I know that we can't solve our economic problems in America until interest rates go up. If you understand that the problem is we don't save enough and we borrow too much, what is behind all that? It's interest rates. Because interest rates are being set by government. They're not being set by the free market. The Federal Reserve says, here's where interest rates are. And right now they say interest rates should be 0. Well, obviously they shouldn't be that low. But clearly, if they're 0, nobody is going to save. And people are going to borrow. But the thing is, all this cheap money that's available, it's not available to small businesses. They can't sell bonds. They can't borrow at the discount window. The cheap money is benefiting Wall Street that can speculate with it. It's benefiting the government or major corporations that can refinance debt through the bond market. But that isn't generating wealth. It's not creating jobs. The companies that need credit can't get it because it's not there. Or the government is guaranteeing student loans, or they're guaranteeing mortgage debt. We need legitimate savings. So it goes to the hands of the entrepreneur, not the speculator, not the financier. And where is all that savings coming from? It's just being created out of thin air. So it's not real. It's simply, the government is debasing the money. They're robbing the purchasing power from Main Street and redirecting it through the banks and through Wall Street. And that's why you see here in America now we've got these protests, Occupy Wall Street. People are furious at what's happening. But again, they're blaming the wrong people. They're blaming capitalism for a problem created by government. They're occupying Wall Street when they should be occupying Washington. They should be protesting the Fed. They should be protesting Congress, the President, the Supreme Court. These are the institutions that are failing America, not corporations or Wall Street. I mean, I don't blame any Wall Street bank for taking a bailout. I would have taken it. I blame the government for giving it to them. The government should have let all the banks that bet wrong fail. They should have let the people that loaned them the money lose their money. They should have allowed the creditors to lose money. But the government didn't do that. That's not capitalism. And when you see these protesters protesting the bailouts and protesting capitalism, that's not capitalism. Capitalism would have let them fail. They're protesting the opposite of capitalism. What they really want, whether they know it or not, is they want capitalism. They're arguing in favor of capitalism and against what our country has become. Crony capitalism, fascism, socialism, corporatism, however you want to label it. But the one way I know you can't label it is capitalism, because that's what it's not.